Got a really interesting and exciting topic. I'm not going to take a long time, but I want to start by thanking our operations manager, Haley Baker, for doing all the behind the scenes work to make sure that you're informed about the events and set up and make sure that, well, basically, she does all the work. And so I like to thank her whenever I can. And also, in particular, want to thank Sheila Amin and Lynda Coon from respectively UCF and Arkansas for organizing this session, which is one of the more exciting, well, they're all exciting, but one of the great sessions that we do each year. Because as you know, CoHE has the all access meetings open to faculty, administrators, staff to do all kinds of topics over the course of the year. But once a year, we take time to also invite students to participate in a panel as part of CoHE Student Engagement programming. And so I'm looking forward to sitting back and hearing from the program that Sheila and Linda have put together, and for the benefit of not only the faculty and staff of honors, but also the student of honors. So let me turn it over to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Jonathan, and I appreciate you stealing my brief welcome.
Oh,
And so
sorry.
that means, no, it's better. It means we can start getting straight to the questions. We have about 135 people who I think they want to hear from me, but want to hear from Dr. Lazar and our panelists. So allow me to introduce Dr. Alexander Lazar, who I'd like all of you to know is not only brilliant, but dedicated as he is doing this from Borneo for us. And I have known Dr. Lazar for a couple, almost 2 decades, and he's a distinguished academic surgical pathologist at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. He is an MD PhD and is absolutely brilliant in everything he does, but more than anything has been always committed to training and developing students both at the medical school level and at the post residency area. So I will leave this slide. We're going to drop it into the chat so that you guys can read this. And then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Lazar. The student bios, we have Angela, Philip, and Sanjeev with us, will also be put on the screen. What we didn't want to do is spend a lot of time with that, rather go straight into the meat of the topic. So I'm going to hand it
Hey,
over.
Sheila, Anthony
Yes.
and Zarin is here too.
Oh, and Anthony's here too. Fantastic. We have all four panelists. Dr. Lazar will give a short overview of the MD PhD track, and then he will moderate some questions with the panelists, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So, Dr. Lazar, I hand this over to you.
Hey guys, I'm going to be on camera just briefly. Unfortunately, when we set this up, it ended up coinciding with a trip that I'm taking to Borneo in Malaysia. I'm riding bikes across the country, and actually, I'm about to head to the airport to do the first stage of that. But it's a super pleasure to be here with you guys. So. I'll talk to you a little bit about myself and my journey to become an MD PhD, and then I'll talk about MD PhD programs just in general, some comments, and then we'll switch it over to the panelists because I'll tell you there since I've been out for more than a quarter of a century, they're going to have a lot more relevant information on what MD PhD programs are as a student today than what my knowledge is. Although I do still maintain contact and teach and mentor MD PhD students through the University of Texas system. I was, as a high school student, I was really very interested in science, particularly in chemistry and physics. But when I was in high school, I actually got very sick and ended up having a pituitary adenoma and had a medical journey with that, and that really sort of focused me on, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if I could use my interest in science to actually help people? And that's kind of how I got interested in medicine. And then as I was looking at the options in medicine, I saw that there was this thing called an MD PhD program that would sort of specifically train you to do both science, and medicine, and do both of these in a deep way. And so I knew even before I went to college that I wanted to do an MD PhD program. I had I went to Austin College, with Sheila, as she mentioned. So that's our connection and why we've known each other for a long time. And so when I went off to college, I knew that I had wanted to do that. I had done research over the summers as a high school student and was really dedicated to this pathway. And so while I was in college, just as a side note, because I knew I was going to medical school, I actually didn't end up concentrating in a science. I actually took degrees in philosophy and political science because I figured those were the things that I wouldn't be studying in the future. And so I took kind of the bare minimums that it took to get into medical school, and then combine that with a deep experience in the liberal arts, which has been an advantage to me throughout my career. Um, so I then went off to UT Southwestern. I went through an MD PhD program there. Mine was a bit of a long journey. I studied with Paul Sternwise and Al Gilman. It took me 6 years to get through my PhD, but I finally got it done. And then went back and finished the last 2 years of medical school. I then went to Brigham and Women's Hospital to do a pathology residency. I did fellowship tissue pathology and in dermatopathology at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and a postdoc at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And then I went out looking for a job and was lucky enough to find one at MD Anderson. And I've been there actually ever since. So I've been at MD Anderson for almost a quarter of a century now. So that's kind of my journey and how I got to where I am. And we can talk more in the future if there's questions about this, about what I'm studying, working on there. So MD PhD programs, why do they exist? Um, we sort of have to step back, I think, deeply into the history of medical education in the United States, which for a number of years was primarily a um, sort of an indentured process where people would go and study with someone else was a physician, and after they did that for a while, they were allowed to call themselves a physician and go off and practice, and it was pretty unregulated, and the quality was fairly uneven. There were a series of medical reforms that were led by a number of people, primarily people who had visited Europe and were looking at what they were doing there, and so there was a movement to improve medical school within the United States, and particularly give it a scientific basis. And so, sort of growing out of that, long history of improving the scientific basis of medical practice within the United States, there was a thought that we really needed people with a deep experience with science and medicine to help sort of push the scientific frontiers of what we could accomplish with the application of science to medicine. And that's kind of where the MD PhD program started with. So there was it started out with a few. They were sponsored by the National Institutes of Health. And in fact, one of my mentors, Al Gilman, was one of the first people to actually go through an MD PhD program, a formal one in Cleveland, and so that's kind of where the programs came from. And there are a variety of ways that these are formulated. With these, you do pursue both degrees at the same time, but some of them you do 1 year of medical school and then you do the PhD, and other ones you do 2 years of medical school and do the PhD. I've even heard of, ones where you do up to the third year and then do the PhD and then come back and finish the fourth year. And so there's all kinds of different ways that these are formulated, but usually it's a sandwich. You do a little bit of medical school, and then you do your doctoral work, and then you close that out with your clinical work in the back half of medicine at the tail end of the program. So with that introduction, I think we'll turn it over and talk to the and start talking to our panelists. And I why don't we why don't we start with having kind of each of the panelists sort of give their little journey in a nutshell as to how they and thanks Sheila for throwing this up, and we'll just start in the order that people are listed here, which looks like it's well, I thought it was alphabetical order, but it's not. So we'll just start from left to right. And why don't each of you, you're kind of summarized here, but why don't you talk, quickly about, how did you get interested in your in going through an MD PhD program? What attracted you to that? So let's start with Philip.
Thank you. My name is Philip Barrison. I'm a sixth year MD PhD student finishing up my dissertation right now here at the University of Michigan in our Department of Learning Health Sciences. Prior to coming here to Michigan, I was at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida, and originally went to college as a music major. Wanted to be a professionally trained bassoonist. Somewhere along that pathway, decided to start exploring some other opportunities while finishing up my music degree, and knew I was interested in healthcare, knew I was interested in medicine, but didn't quite know my pathway forward. So started kind of working in research in sociology and healthcare communications near the end of my undergraduate, and propelled me to work both in Washington, D.C. as a policy fellow with a lobbying firm out there, as well as a study coordinator of a regional hospital. And as I was nearing the point where I was deciding to apply to medical school, I kept having conversations with my research mentors at the time, trying to weigh what I would be happiest doing. And there's part of me that knew I wanted to be a clinician and I wanted to be able to work with patients, but there's also the part of me that knew I wanted to develop these research skills and techniques that I hadn't yet been able to develop and integrate and find a way for that to meet my clinical interests. And kind of actually, I'm probably in the minority. I applied to MD PhD programs on a whim 2 weeks before the application deadline came up, specifically for MD PhDs in the social sciences, which are an emerging but not totally unheard of thing at this point. But I'm happy to talk more about what it means to pursue an MD PhD as a physician social scientist to anyone who's interested. Thank you.
I'm Anthony. I am originally from Bolivar, Missouri, which is in Southwest Missouri. And I went to University of Arkansas with the wonderful and stellar Lynda Coon, who's on the call. And there I studied biochemistry, had a great time, and following my undergraduate experience, in case anyone is also looking at different bridge-year opportunities and is interested in asking more about that later. I did Fulbright the year after graduating from University of Arkansas, where I English in Andorra. And then the following year, I did a NIH prep program at Mount Sinai in New York. And during that prep program, which, if you haven't heard, is or maybe was, I don't really know with the state of the NIH, but a opportunity for post-bac students to get trained and kind of hone in on their research interests. And it was there where I really got interested in immunology, and in a rapid fire sequence of events, I then came to UCLA to do the MSTP here, where I am now entering my fifth year of the program, starting my third year of the PhD. And yeah, I'll stop there, but plenty to say.
Perfect. And I think Angela was next.
Hi everyone. My name is Angela. I guess I was originally born in Canada, but I've been in Florida since 2006. So I would say pretty much a Floridian. I went to the University of Central Florida for undergrad, where I studied biomedical sciences. And I think there was kind of when I realized like I had always wanted to do something in medicine, and my mom's a physician, so I kind of grew up like just shadowing her, kind of getting to know the medical field. But I think like through the shadowing and through other experiences with other physicians, I kind of felt like there was something missing. Like I knew I wanted to do like clinical work, but it didn't quite seem complete. Like it didn't feel, I guess, like fulfilling in like in the whole sense to me. And so when I did undergraduate research at UCF, I realized that like that was kind of like what was my passion. And actually, my PI was the one to bring up what an MD PhD even was. And so I also applied very late. I think I only found out what it was like my junior year. And I'm actually one of the maybe few people who didn't take a gap year before going to medical school. So I basically like decided to apply right then and there, and then luckily was able to be admitted to the University of Florida. But I think like that was still a really like I think it's still a really important decision that you kind of have to ask yourself like what is really important to you, and just make sure those values aren't being lost through your career because you know we want to love what we do. So I think that's kind of what steamrolled everything into kind of where I am today at the University of Florida.
Okay, great. And then I think Sanjay, you want to close this question out for us?
So, hello everyone. My name's Sanjeev. I grew up in a mix of both Orlando, Florida, and Alabama, and then I ended up doing my undergrad at the University of Central Florida with Angela. I think for me, going into undergrad, I had this sort of idea that I wanted to go into medicine. I really, enjoyed the sciences growing up. The idea of patient care really spoke to me. It was something I was super fascinated in and wanted to explore further. I think, like others have said, I think when I was doing my first research experience at the University of Central Florida in an immunology lab, I think just seeing like the endless potential that basic science research had and the ways in which it can be applied, translated towards improving the lives of patients in the clinic. I think that just, motivated me in a way that, nothing really had before. So I really kind of knew that I wanted to have this strong angle in basic science research while also being able to see patients at the same time. So I can like off of that, I sort of chose the MD PhD as a sort of natural path that would allow me to do both. After finishing my undergrad, I spent a year at the University of Central Florida as a gap year working in the same lab that I was at. And then now I'm at the Washington University in St. Louis MD PhD program.
Okay, well, thanks to everybody, and hopefully, those of you that are watching can see that there's a real diversity of stories and journeys and types of people that get interested in MD PhD programs and what their interests are and how they get there. So there's lots and lots of roads to this, and I'll mention in combination with that, there's lots and lots of pathways, after MD PhD from there are people that, decide that they mainly want to do research and never do additional clinical training, but use the MD to sort of formulate and frame the types of questions they're interested in. That's certainly what Al Gilman, one of my mentors, did. He never did residency, but he used his medical degree to formulate the types of questions he wanted to ask in the research laboratory, but did not ever do clinical training. Sorry, I'm gonna repeat some of this, but I don't know where I broke off. But he ended up doing quite well. He won the Nobel Prize while I was in his lab in 1994, and so that I don't think his lack of clinical training really held him back all that much. And he also, I don't know if this is still used in medical schools, but he was also the author of the pharmacologic basis of medicine, which was when I was in medical school, was a textbook that we all used to learn pharmacology from. So, but there's also other people that will do clinical training and then not have a research lab, but will use the clinical training that they had, to use the scientific training that they have to really hone the types of questions that they want to ask and answer, whether it's interpretation of clinical trials, or more translational medicine. And then there's people that legitimately try to do both, and this is what's going to lead into my next set of questions. I shouldn't forget also there's actually I have a lot of friends that have been very successful from this background going into industry and to working for big pharma and small pharma and biotech as well. So there's lots and lots of pathways, out of the backside of this. But one of the big things that I think, and this is one that you get asked almost, I think, routinely in the interview process, and so I'll let each of the panelists, and we'll just go in we can go in the same order again. To answer is one of the big things you always get asked in interviews is, okay, so you're interviewing here for an MD PhD program. Why don't you just want to go to medical school or just want to go to graduate school? Why do you want to do both? And what does that mean to you? So why don't we take that and sort of go through and actually let's reverse it up. Let's go from right to left this time, and so we'll have the person who spoke last spoke first this time, and we'll do it reverse. So let's go from the right side to the left if we can remember that.
I think for me, I really felt that like personally going and pursuing both degrees was really the only path that would allow me to do everything that I wanted to do. I think, why not just pursue an MD? I feel that my interests were really in not so much as, just solely practicing patient care, but the next generation of drugs and therapies that would advance the current standard of care that patients are being provided at the moment. And I knew for me, the only way to be able to do that was to get the dedicated 4 to 5 years of research training that come with the protected research time that you get during your PhD. I think going back to the other question that why just doing a PhD wouldn't have been alone for me. I think in my particular interests, I think one, I had a strong interest in patient care that I wouldn't have been so easily ready to let go. I think the second interest was that I really I was fascinated with this idea of precision medicine that, not only do we develop new treatments, but we also tailor them towards different populations depending upon their specific health needs. And I felt that, going in this era of precision medicine, I felt that, the talking to patients, getting to know the exact details of their conditions, getting to know the exact things that they're looking for in their treatment, the exact weaknesses that are there in the current standard of care. I think that would be something that would allow me to generate not only new therapies, but new therapies that are most readily able to be translated to the clinic and most easily be able to improve patients' lives in the largest capacity. So that's why I think I needed both degrees.
I just wanted to echo a lot of what Sanjeev has already mentioned because I think what he said kind of resonates probably with all of us on the panel. And I think I just found that I love the flexibility of an MD PhD in the sense of like, I'm someone who, when I guess like in different parts of my life and different parts of my career, I'd like to be able to pivot in different directions depending on where the science is going, where the like care is going. And that gives you the opportunity to work in industry if you like, work in academia, work in a clinic or whatever you kind of want to do and whatever fits kind of like your motives or your drives and like your passions at that moment, I think makes the most sense to me. So that's something that I really wanted to hold on to and be able to like quickly change and adapt to like that growing like scientific environment. And then also for me, I think like just pursuing one or the other, like I guess I reaffirm my decision to do an MD PhD like every day I'm in the program itself because so I'm a third year MD PhD student and so a first year graduate student. And so just coming fresh out of like the medical curriculum in the first 2 years, I feel that frustration from my MD peers of just like not being able to do like to do more than what the current therapies already provide, right? So when we see patients, oftentimes like they'll kind of to give us their problem or their concern, and we'll do our best to kind of like help guide their diagnoses or their treatment plan. But oftentimes we're often hit with this barrier of like, this is what we know now, and we don't really know what else could be out there. So I think that's where that research comes in handy. And especially now that I'm in my PhD, I can like look into that more because there's always these burning questions I had that I was like, well, we don't really have that time to solve them, but an MD PhD really provides you that dedicated time and that training. And that way, if it dawns upon you to also mentor other students later down the road, as whether that's like a PI, professor, or some other mentorship role, like we have that skill set to be able to teach that next generation as well, and to be able to pass on those like scientific techniques or just discoveries that we've made.
Perfect. And our next panelist.
Yeah, I'll echo what the previous panelists had said. And I also just kind of want to acknowledge, I think what I would have said at the beginning of applying and getting into this program is probably a bit different from what I would say now. At the beginning, I really was just super attached to both having patient interactions, but then also the feeling I had when I was doing research as an undergraduate, and so I didn't talk too much about the specific type of research I did then, but originally I was an organic chemist. I got really attached to the feeling of creating something and discovering something. And so I think, while still both those things are true now, and kind of just looking at the training I've received up until this point, I can really appreciate the role you kind of play as a translator between the two fields of science and medicine through this training, and the unique problem-solving abilities you develop along the way, because it really kind of hones you to be a systems level scientist, and whether it's the healthcare system, the immunology system, or whatever particular system you're looking at, you're learning to solve problems in the context you're in. So yeah, that's just I think I'll stop there, but part of why I want enjoy doing both degrees now.
Perfect. Thanks.
I think I can reiterate a lot of what's been said here. I think this question of why MD, why PhD, why MD, PhD, especially as quote unquote a non-traditional MD, PhD student, is something that those who pursue MD, PhDs in social sciences get pushed very hard on in our application processes because we're outside of the box. We're not typical, we're not normal. And there's a lot of skepticism towards the value that's always directly contributed to us. When I was applying, I think I often have approached this from the mindset of, as a sociologist of health professions and sociologist of healthcare systems, there is inherent value to both being able to have an insider perspective, understanding how healthcare systems work, knowing how to behave, how to operate with patients and healthcare providers, and learn how to ask the right questions in those settings. But then, as a medical student, I think I've continued to raise the point of I came into this program to learn a skill set, how to be an ethnographer, how to be an anthropologist and a sociologist, how to ask questions. And I think for some people, you don't need a PhD to do that. You have the life experience, you're in a position to do that. For me, the PhD has been a pathway to develop those tools. And I think as I'm reaching the end of my training program, I feel like the unique positionality I've given myself by both learning how to be a clinician in training as well as to be a social scientist in training has given me a perspective that scholarly wise, I know I have a unique voice to contribute. And as I think about how I can become an interdisciplinary translator between healthcare system leadership, technology developers, etc., I think to me that's the value in the MD PhD, and it's about developing a tool set more than anything else. Whether you need both degrees to do it is really up to the person in your own life experiences leading up to that point.
So thanks for that, and I just really wanted to reiterate. So I would agree that what Philip is doing is is sort of non-traditional, but I will say that there's often been an interest in this, and I would say that I have many of my MD PhD friends and including myself have very significant interests outside of science and medicine, and and oftentimes these actually inform the things that we're doing in terms of our research, what we choose to work on, and why we choose to work on it. And probably from my liberal arts background, when I was a student at UT Southwestern, we helped create lots of interdisciplinary programs with SMU, which was just down the street from us. So we had combined classes on medical ethics with the law students and the medical students, and then we had humanities courses. We got our professors to talk about what their interests were outside of medicine with us, where they would invite us to our home, something we called the Fourth Academy after the Plato's academies, and so there was I think that that's a very healthy thing to do. I know that you're trying to do it in a different way than what I'm talking about because you're trying to incorporate it specifically as part of your professional career. But I would encourage everybody that the humanities and the social sciences and other forms of learning outside of traditional science and medicine really do and should inform the work that we do within that as well. So now that the faculty that are on here hear about all the other stuff that I was doing during my MD PhD program, they can go, okay, yeah, now we see why it took him 6 years to finish his PhD. But the So let me go, and I want to do the sort of the next question. And this is one that you guys may not have as much insight into, but you're probably already starting to think about it. So sort of the classic joke for an MD PhD, which sort of plays off of our insecurities, once we get out and start practicing, is that it's always said that if you, as an MD PhD, when you walk into a group of researchers, everybody says, "Gosh, I hope he's a really good clinician." And when you walk into a group of clinicians, they go, "Gosh, I hope he's a really good researcher." Just sort of saying that it's really hard to be, the best at both. And so I don't think that's true, and I think there's a lot of advantages, to doing these two together. But how would you guys how would you address and how are you thinking about, how you want to combine these as you get out? Because this is a constant struggle during your training, and also as you begin to define yourself as you move into your first faculty position. And let's go. Well, I tell you what, we'll reverse again, and now we'll go back from left to right. So we'll start with you again, Philip.
Yeah, I think every MD PhD student can relate to the feeling of constant uncertainty with this. And I think as I've gone through my trajectory through the program, what I've wanted has changed. I think ultimately, where if I could choose my dream position moving forward, I think finding a split between a joint appointment in internal medicine, general medicine faculty, and be able to educate medical students, work with medical students on the wards, and a joint appointment in the Department of Sociology or Anthropology. Um, Ideally, to me, it's kind of this split between being able to use clinical work as a hospitalist to serve as a lens to the healthcare system and to my own research questions, but also be able to then take that over into more of my scholarly and academic work. I don't have a perfect answer for what that looks like 10 years from now, but that's part of the kind of discovery and exploration, I suppose.
Yeah, if you had it all figured out as a student right now, I'd be worried about you. So yeah. So anyway, next panelist.
Um, yeah, great, great question. I think probably for me, thinking about those moments is my experiences kind of just grounding in the moments you do have where you realize, oh, my other training plays a role here, and I'm able to contribute to the conversation in a way that other people can't. So, talking about like we study the thymus in this lab and talking about the anatomy immediately surrounding the thymus and the like cardiovascular structure and things. That's things I'm able to bring to the conversation during our lab meetings that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. And so I think just remembering, you know, because my time is spent differently during this training, um, I will always still have more to learn, but I also have plenty to teach. And so it kind of just, I guess, empowers me to um, keep that bi-directional sharing going.
Yes, and so to jump in with everyone else, I think um I also agree with I guess we're in a very privileged position to be an MD PhD student or even in an MD PhD once we graduate, just because we do have that lens of being able to see both patients and also bring those observations back to the lab and vice versa. And that's something I think with just an MD or just a PhD that can be difficult to do. So I feel like our observations are very informative. And that's honestly one of the first things someone in my lab said when I first joined is that, oh, wow, you'll have a whole different perspective on what actually is clinically relevant, because sometimes it feels like we're just doing stuff in lab that, may or may not go anywhere. But it's really nice to have that clinical perspective and to tell us like, oh, is this even meaningful, right? So I do think that that is kind of where our strength lies. And so, but yes, I feel like Philip has said, like I always have imposter syndrome like every day. So I think that there is this like sort of like two hats you're always wearing of like, am I really the best at anything I'm doing? But I think honestly, with that practice and that support system around you, it really is a unique role to be in and to be able to like inform both fields.
I think really just echoing off of what everyone has said, I think it's definitely, especially just having completed my first year of training, it's difficult to sort of imagine what exactly the future looks like. But I think kind of take comfort in the idea that, whatever sort of way I kind of carve out a sort of future career, which, I think at this moment I kind of imagine at least to some degree having, a basic science research lab while also maintaining clinical duties. In what context and what proportion, I'm not that sure. But in really whatever sort of field I choose to go into, I have that sort of mindset that, I approach it people talk about how much you want to split your time between research and clinic. And I think, I want to go in with the idea that in every moment I'm acting as both a researcher and a clinician, because every time you're seeing patients and you're, as Angela mentioned, all the new sort of observations you're seeing as you're working with them, those are all different research ideas. Those are all different things you can explore further. And having that sort of research background is going to allow you to say that, oh wow, is this can be explored further? If you see a new finding, is this something that's actually rigorous? Is this something that's actually, worth thinking about? And it sort of gives you that mentality, gives you that sort of skill set to sort of be, a bridge between the two worlds. I mean, even, as I'm entering the next few months, my PhD lab, the question I'm going to start out exploring is something that, happened when I was in one of my classes. And I'm like, hey, why don't we think about this? And, it was something I would have even occurred to me if I hadn't had that sort of preclinical medical school style training. So I think trying to, wherever I go in my future career, knowing that, I'll be fully trained in, both research and clinical science, and no matter what sort of path I do, still being able to practice those in some capacity.
Okay, fantastic, and hopefully those of you that are watching took some notes on this, because these are the kind of answers that are really mature and well thought out, and that admissions committees like to hear. Of course, you want to tell your own story, but this is the kind of thinking about why the dual training is really important. So just to let everybody know, we're getting to the really experimental part of this session now. This is where I've just gotten into a van that's taking me to the airport in Borneo to do the first stage of my bike ride. So hopefully we'll maintain contact. This is where we'll see how good the 5G is in Borneo. So anyway, so one of the things that I wanted to address, because there was some talk, and I think this is all of you are probably hearing this now. We're in terms of funding for research, and what does the future of biomedicine look like? Well, the future of biomedicine and research is incredibly rich. We can do more things now than we ever could before. We have to think a lot about what can we do, what should we do. This is why we need people in the humanities to be that are familiar with medicine as well, to talk about the ethical implications of the things that we're about to be able to do and even can do right now, and what can we do, what should we do, what are the resources we should allocate, and these sorts of things. And all of these are important questions, but there's also a lot of uncertainty surrounding the funding situation. And I would say we've been through lean periods before, but what's a little bit different about this is the uncertainty of what's likely to happen. But I'll tell you that there's still projects are still being funded. In fact, we just got our notice of award, recently for a large SPORE grant, which is one of the largest grants that we can get. This is one where I'm a PI, and we just got a $12 million 5-year grant to study sarcomas and how to better treat them, which is one of the rare cancers that I work on. So it's still possible. It's just the uncertainty now that's problematic. And so I certainly wouldn't, avoid going into this career because of the uncertainty that we have now. I think this is going to straighten out, over time. So, so let's get back now to our, to our panelists and sort of go on to the next question. And we'll start with we'll sort of do the reverse again. So we'll start with Sanjeev again. What's the one thing that really surprised you about being an MD PhD student that you weren't expecting when you entered the process? And I'm sorry, I'm hitting you up with this first, which is going to be the hardest for you because these panelists have no idea what I was going to ask them. I'm just kind of throwing stuff out there. So we'll start with you, but everybody else is going to understand that you're the one that's getting hit with this, first, and everybody else has more time to think.
Definitely. So I think, I would have to say that the one thing that to me sort of surprised me the most, I think this is more something I kind of learned about myself, was that just the degree of different opportunities that were out there and the amount of different fields that, seemed so interesting and so fascinating for me to pursue that I hadn't even considered before starting my MD PhD training path. So, my prior work was in immunology in the context of hematological malignancies, and I had fully come in to my MD PhD training program with the idea that I'm going to do a PhD focused in cancer immunology, with the idea that, likely I'll think about, pursuing residency in, maybe hemonc or something along those lines. But as I came in and, just in the first couple of weeks, we get exposed to all sorts of different faculty doing all sorts of different work. I started to just on the spot become so fascinated and realize just how fascinating some of these other topics in biology and medicine were that I had never even thought about considering. And I think that's an experience that's not only shared by me, but a lot of my classmates are now end up, thinking about joining labs that are like completely different than what they had previously considered. And I think at some programs, they told me that 80% of our students switch and go into a different field. So I think for me, at least, the biggest thing about joining was just realizing just the scope of opportunity, the scope of different fields that are interesting, and realizing that sort of the preset plans I had for myself were not going to end up working out. And, for me, I ended up joining a neuroimmunology lab, which is something I'd never considered before. So just the fact there's so much opportunity out there.
Okay, next panelist.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to take this in a completely different direction, I think. But I feel like something I realized one day while I was like in medical school, probably doing my, I don't know, 100th exam, but like was just that like life is going to be busy for the next 8 years, for the next like 20 years, for the rest of time until, you live, right? So, and I think I realized like personal life really doesn't stop. And that's something I think every MD PhD that came before me also gave me the same advice, and something I think that's really valuable to hear, because if something's important to you, if having a family is important to you, if getting married, if meeting those like let's say like life milestones matters to you, like just do it, because there really isn't a good time for any of it. And so especially in such a long career pathway, I think you kind of just have to seize the moment, seize the opportunity. I actually met my husband in med school, and we got married during second year of med school, and that was the craziest, wildest time to do it during the neuro block and when there were like 9 exams in 7 weeks. But I feel like I think there's just not a right time, and I think if it works for your situation and your life, then do it, because why not? And so yeah, I think that was probably the most surprising, because I guess I never really thought that that would happen to me, but I think looking back, I'm really, really glad like the way things turned out and just being open to that opportunity too.
Yeah, I definitely I have my own answer, but I do want to emphasize that because especially being halfway through this program, like life does happen. And I remember, I'm sure some of the other panelists, something a lot of people told me when I was applying and trying to decide where to go. People frequently said, pick where you're gonna end your 20s. And I think now here in the middle of this program, it's you have to learn a balance of, yes, things are always going to be busy, but the important things that I want to do in this life, like I still need to do. But the to answer the question with my own experience, just because it's kind of what I've been thinking about most recently, you know, one thing, and I think this mostly has to do with just kind of like the way expectations were set with some of the people I've talked to, but everyone really emphasized that, it's so hard whenever the medical school class you enter with graduates and goes on to residency, and that just happened for my class. And I'm actually kind of surprised by how comfortable I have been with that transition because it really sounded like and I know for a lot of people it is, really challenging having people move and seeing, that could be me, that I could be making more money or whatever. But I think that, it's been okay because I still, keep in contact with the friends that I made from that experience. And just when we talk now, it's is different in that we're doing different things now. And I will be honest, I don't envy the clinic schedule. Research the research schedule is being able to kind of plan experiments on your own time has been pretty great. And hearing my, friends on OB-GYN doing labor and delivery, working nights, it's really just not something I envy. But yeah, that transition, is just kind of been a moment to remember we kind of all have our own path, and this is the ones we're on.
I think as I've looked back at my time in an MD PhD program, I think the thing that I could never have fully been prepared for, even if I was warned about it, is the degree of whiplash you have kind of bouncing between these two sets of training. First year of medical school, you're studying for exams. It's very deductive. You're kind of carrying forward this type of studying and learning that a lot of you have done throughout undergrad. And at the end of the day, you have something you're working towards each day. When you enter clerkships, depending on the program, for me, this was second year of medical school, so I did all my clerkships before starting the PhD. You still have this very deductive learning, but you also have this subjectivity of being in the clinic, having to put on this performance every day, and just the hours itself that become draining. You enter your PhD, and suddenly reins are handed over to you, and now you sit down with your advisor or your PI or your mentor weekly or however often you meet with them. And for me, at least, the experience has very much been this isn't them telling me what I'm going to be doing. It's me coming to them and saying, this is what's going on. This is what I want to talk about today. This is what I'm working on. And I think there is this kind of transversing disciplinary boundaries of how we go about navigating ourselves as students in these spaces that, for me, it was adjustments going from medical school to being a graduate researcher. And I know going back to medical school, it'll be another adjustment to have to lay off those reins. I think this is more emblematic of the duality of MD PhD training and existing between two different disciplines of training and thought at any given point, and something that as students you already start reconciling with before you enter professionally into this space. And you try to answer this question, well, how are you going to use these two degrees together? So I think it's something I don't think I could have prepared for, but I think if it's something you're interested in, just asking yourself as a learner, what type of learner are you and how flexible are you to constantly changing up the way you're trying to learn? Because medical school does it once, work on a PhD, we'll do it a second time. And I think it's just constant back and forth.
Yeah, I'll tell you the guys that I think that everything you mentioned also surprised me. I also found the love of my life while I was finishing my doctoral work, and got married as I was graduating. My wife actually did set the wedding after match day. So if that went really badly, maybe we wouldn't have to go through with the wedding. But everything went fine. I also had a lot of concerns and missing people at 2 points. Actually, 3 points that were interesting. When I separated from my medical school class after the second year, which was how mine, seeing them go on was tough. Seeing my original class graduate, trying to reintegrate with a new class was also tough when I went back from the wards. And then also when I was a third year doing my rotations, actually having the former medical students in my class be my residents and senior residents on the clinical services was also a really interesting process. So um, I'm just pulling up to the airport. We have just a couple of minutes left. And so I'm going to throw one more question to you guys, since we're talking with a lot of students who I think are interested in MD PhD programs. And again, we'll do the reverse order. So we're gonna start with you again, Philip. Is what's the one word of advice that you would want to, or the one piece of advice that you'd want to give, these prospective people as they're thinking about applying to an MD PhD program? What's the one thing you wish you'd known, or advice that you could give to them? And let's close out with that.
Yeah, I think this is to whether you're doing MD PhD program, if you decide to go to medical school, if you just decide to go to graduate school, becoming a student does not need to become your entire personality. You can continue to be passionate about the things in your life that are important to you, whether it's the people who are close, your hobbies, your other artistic endeavors. I don't think medical school is a place to abandon those. And I think as you're looking at programs, keeping in mind culture of institutions and saying, are the students there pursuing things and interested in things beyond just their day-to-day lab work and their clinical work? Because yeah, it's a long process, and I wouldn't want to do this for 8 to 10 years if I wasn't able to continue to ingratiate some of my other interests.
Yeah, it is a little cliche, but I really was gonna say a similar thing of just have fun. There's so much opportunity to work yourself too hard at any stage, but at the end of the day, you are your biggest investment. So um, find what gives you energy, keep doing it, whether it's running, salsa dancing, whatever you want to do. Find something, and if you go through this program, find something that helps ground you to as you go along.
I just wanted to say that like your career and your training is going to be exactly what you make of it. So if there is something that doesn't sit right with you, you feel angry about a certain issue, you feel like there's something isn't right in your clinical environment, or even just like be a part of those advocacy groups, be a part of the change you want to see in the world, in the science that you want to see. Like if we're having, for example, like funding issues, and that's something that bothers you, like be part of like movements that kind of help create and move that along, right? Because like there's nothing to be gained by, I guess, just watching it happen, right? So, and I think that's just something that's really important to me. And like find those places like in your community and in your med school where people are like-minded like you and kind of want to go. Like, for example, last year I went to the Capitol with a lot of my other med students to kind of fight for healthcare for citizens that don't have insurance. Or I specifically spoke to legislators about like having an insulin cap because I have family that have diabetes and is largely impacted by the costs, for example. So if there's something that strikes you as like, I want to do something about it, like do something about it. And I think that's kind of really what makes your career and makes kind of like your path just all the more fulfilling.
I think echoing off of what everyone has said, I think it's extremely important, not just as you go in and start the MD PhD training program, but in terms of looking in to your application process, that you stay very true to yourself and really follow the things you're passionate about. I think looking at a lot of people around me, including myself, I think the things I chose to do in undergrad were not necessarily the things that like people say, this is a standard activity you have to do, to get one to go. I really was selective about what I wanted to do. And I really made sure that every specific thing I was doing was something I was incredibly passionate about. And if it was some activity, different types of clinical volunteering that I was like, I'm not finding this too interesting. I'm not finding I'm emotionally invested in it. I just didn't choose to pursue that. And I think the things I chose to pursue, even though, on a small glance, it may not have much to do with medicine, it may not have much to do with research. I think I really enjoyed the time I spent pursuing those activities. And I think when it came to the application process, talking about those things was super helpful. I think there's just one other thing I'll say is that if any of you guys, you're considering the MD PhD training process, I think as Philip was mentioning earlier, being a grad student is something that's, completely different than what most people have experienced in terms of your sort of perspective as a student that you've had before. It's a really an atmosphere where you're out there, alone in a sense. Of course, you have your advisors, your mentors, your colleagues helping you, but it's basically you driving your own learning. And I think the best way to sort of see is that for me, and of course, in terms of, doing well in applications, is that get some sort of experience being independent. I think, this is something all of us have done is that really whatever you do in terms of research experience, make sure that you're in some capacity, you're sort of driving your own work forward. You're sort of taking those steps to make progress in your own sort of field. You have some sort of intellectual, you have some sort of control over what you're doing. And I think that's one going to help, tell you if this is really the right training path for me. And two, it's going to help you stand out in terms of your applications.
All right. Well, I will. I've made it to the airport. Thanks everybody for enduring this little journey with me. And I just want to thank the students. Hopefully, you've seen we have this really diverse group of passionate, young people who are dedicated to what they do, and these are the kind of people that are going to change the world that we live in. And if you're interested, in this process, you've learned a lot about it, and join us on this MD PhD road if that's what you become passionate about. I will tell you the most important thing about this is being passionate about what you do and actually picking something, as I put it, without proper English, picking something that you can't not do. You need to be passionate about what you do, and it needs to be something that you can't imagine not doing it. And that's what gets you through the process and allows you to get done what you need to get done. So with that, again, thanks to these panelists. They were amazing. My job was super easy. All I had to do was ask questions, and they were the stars. So thank you very much. And I guess I'll turn it over to you, Sheila, to close this out.
Thank you, Dr. Lazar. And I can't thank you enough for doing this while you're in Borneo. And we will wish you well on your cycling trip through Asia. I hope you will send some pictures so that we can see what you're doing and how it's going. And to the panelists, to the four of you, my goodness, are you impressive? We're so proud of you. And, it's these types of interactions with you that lead us to know that the future is really bright because we have such impressive graduates who are going to be able to help us solve really the complex problems of the world. And to everyone in the who joined us today, thank you so much for joining us for this. This is the first of hopefully many of the National Student Engagement Series that CoHE is hoping to put on to be able to invite students to learn from other graduates of the honors colleges across this country on topics of interest to them. Jonathan, I will now hand this over to you.
Thank you very much, Sheila, and thank you and Lynda both for organizing it. Thank you, Dr. Lazar, for being our fabulous moderator, and hope you have a good trip. Thank you as well to the panelists. I learned a lot listening to you and thinking about how you think about finding a good balance across three parts of your lives, as some of you termed it, your personal life and your PhD and your MD programs. It's admirable and inspiring. Let me end by saying that this, as I said earlier, this is our first all-access meeting for Council on Honors Education for the year. We kind of will return to our regular schedule of all-access meetings through much of the course of the rest of the next year, or the rest of the year. Our next session is on October 9th. In which Dean Tara Williams of Arizona State University will lead a session on AI and honors, and thinking about that from multiple perspectives. So I encourage you, the faculty and staff and administrators of honors, to join us for that one, and invite your colleagues from your campuses to join us. We've got a good schedule of programs throughout the course of the year, culminating, of course, with all of us heading to Arizona State for the HIRU 2026 conference. So we'll continue our professional development work through CoHE and then get together and really do it in an intensive way next May in Arizona. So we'll Haley and I will keep this open for people to chit chat for a few more minutes, as many other people will then filter out and enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks again, everybody.
So I actually have a few questions regarding like MD PhD admissions. So some of the students might be a little more helpful in that aspect. I grew up thinking I was just going to go to medical school. And then, just like everyone said, I got into a research lab and I absolutely love it. Like, it's just, I'm the lab manager and I feel like empowered to be where I am at such a young age. And it's just like, it's crazy how I'm feeling. And so the MD PhD programs have really like been calling my name, but I'm like anxious that I maybe don't have enough clinical experience to maybe do like the dual degree now that I've kind of honed in on being present in the research field. So I guess my question is like, what does experience look like on these kind of applications? Like if mine leans a little more towards the PhD and a little less towards the MD, does that make my chances maybe a little bit worse? Or am I making sense? Anyone can answer. I'm not picky.
I will jump in because I am about to do an experiment, and so I'll have to go. I do think that that is okay. Because I think when it comes to clinical experience, you don't know until you are in a clinical capacity what you're getting into. Most of the
Right,
people doing these interviews do understand that, and while they, do want to see some extent that you've explored your interest in being in that setting. The truth is, until I did wards, I did not know what it was like to interview a patient and to,
right.
do a history and not have all these interactions. So, it's understandable if you feel stronger or if I feel like that versus not having enough research experience, it's whenever I talk to students, the research, it really does need to be there to do an MD, PhD,
Right.
but the clinic comes.
Okay. Okay, good.
With
That makes
that, I'm
me
gonna
feel
jump
so
off.
much better. Thank you so much.
I will speak from both student who's done this, and I've sat on our admissions committee for a few years now and reviewing applications. And I think when I compare just regular medical student applications to MD, PhD applications, it is not uncommon to see 70% of that application be about research, and that's totally normal. I think at least from the MD PhD perspective, when I look at MD PhD applications, I'm looking at clinical experience. I just want to ensure that you know what you're getting into from a medicine side, that you have some experiences, that you understand enough about what the life of a physician looks like. Um, that when I sit down with an actual interview for you, that comes across especially. So some people that's going to be much more than others, but I wouldn't be too concerned if you feel like you've had some breadth of experiences in the meantime. Mind you, with the MD, PhD applications, you do get the opportunity. You have your personal statement, which
Right,
both to the MD, PhD program as well as the medical school admissions committee themselves.
right,
And every school's admissions committee, well, it's structured a little bit different. But then you also have your like YMD PhD essay and your research experiences essay. And when you look at the length that research experiences essay gives you, they give you about 10,000 words, I think, to write about
yeah,
research, and compared to, I think, probably 5,000, 6,000 words split between the other two essays. So MD, PhD, there's an expectation that a lot of students are coming. They've been at the NIH. They've been working as lab coordinators, study coordinators. So I wouldn't let that dissuade you. I think it's just a matter of kind of asking yourself, especially if you sit down and write a draft of a personal statement or bounce off a mentor, someone you know, do you feel like the clinical experience you have had has been informative enough for you to feel
Okay.
confident in your decision?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think pretty much the same perspective, just from like a personal standpoint. I kind of related a lot to what you were saying when I was in the application process. I spent almost all my time in the lab, so it's very difficult to sort of accumulate the level of hours you see from like the MD, your MD counterparts in terms of the application process. But from a lot of the people I spoke to, obviously there's some people who have, thousands and thousands of hours of both research even and clinical experiences. But I know a lot of people, including myself, who had around, 50 to 150 hours of total clinical experience. And I don't think there's a certain limit, as everyone else was saying, in terms of how much you need. I think you're going to have to write a personal statement saying why you want to become a physician, right? And then you have to write a statement saying why you want to become an MD, PhD, and then of course your research experience essay. So you need to have enough experience towards which you're able to answer those questions and talk in a strong way about, why you want to do what you do. But I wouldn't say if you have a certain degree, you shouldn't be worried about what you see your MD counterparts doing. As long as you have like 50 to 150 hours, from what I've seen around, that's more than enough.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
just one last, oh, sorry.
No, go girl. I'm here.
Just one last thought because I also need to leave. But I think something that also people don't talk about is the ND PhD like interview process, especially when you've applied already and you've like being able to talk about. So usually per school, it's like 6 to 8 interviews per one school, and you 6 of those are research, like MD PhD side of things, and then 2 of them are MD side of things. So you really do have to get admitted to both sides. But I think being able to talk about your research is going to be like the majority of your experience with that school, right? So you have to be really strong and really confident what you're saying, know your subject really well. And then also with the MD side, of course, just have that initial knowledge of what the clinical experience is like, how to interact with patients. But truly, like your strength is research, like everyone has said. But thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let me also say, in my thanks to the panelist, none of, but I think you probably signed up for the hour, and if you've got other places you need to be, don't feel like you must stay. The official program's over, but obviously if you've got a little free time, I'm sure some of the students are hanging on, have a couple additional questions, and then it may be after a couple more minutes, then a couple of the faculty might hang on and chit chat. But anyway, I wanted to give you permission to not extend your commitment, because it turns out everybody here are quite impressively busy people.
I had a question if I could ask it.
Sure.
Okay. So it's good to see you, Sanjeev. Good to see you, Dr. Lazar. So I just had a question regarding like particularly when you're applying to programs. So um when you look around programs and they ask you the secondary question, why us, right? I mean, for one, it's for the objective of like, okay, you have to answer that question, but more importantly, how do you figure out fundamentally why us? What are the things you should be looking out for a school to if you know this particular school it should be for you? And I guess to make the question a little harder, maybe like what are some places you can look beyond what is traditionally on just the website? Because perhaps maybe what is on the website doesn't fully capture the essence of like how it feels like to be at a particular school.
I'd say that's a really good question. That's something, when I a few 2 years ago was going through the process, had that same sort of struggle. I think it's really challenging because if you look at, a lot of the MD PhD programs, they're going for the MSTP grant, which basically has a list of objectives that each program needs to meet. And in attempts to meet those objectives, a lot of the programs end up having a lot of commonalities in between them, most likely more commonalities than differences, just in terms of from a structure perspective, in terms of meeting, what's expected from the NIH. I think for me, if I were to say that one place you really can look and get the best information about what are the true, what's the true culture, what's the vibes of a school, what are the true things that has to offer. Sometimes, of course, Googling, going on the websites, there's all sorts of great stuff you can find. But I think a really good way to sort of get to the meat of the question would be to, reach out to current students at some of the programs you're interested in. Just reach out to a bunch. A lot of them are, super happy to meet you, and it's just for 15 to 20 minutes. And I think I'm surprised at like how many of just my current classmates have gotten like those sort of emails and how common that actually is. And I think from them you actually get like the real unfiltered things that may not be on the website, that may not be broadly displayed, but those are like the type of things that would be helpful to write in those sort of essays.
I think
Makes
the
sense.
other
Thank you.
thing to consider when you're thinking about like school and school fit, depending on who you're answering this question for, whether it's in an essay, like a secondary essay for a school, or if it's during your interviews, think about your audience. Because if this is a secondary essay for the MD PhD program, part of this that's being elicited here is like, what about the research here is of interest? What is there a certain department, a research institute, researchers you're interested in working with? Um, or trying to get a hint at kind of like why do you think you're a fit within their graduate program? Mind you, if this is also for the medical school, you need to kind of balance that line because if you're just talking about researchers, then that might not end up being that appealing to them. I think this is more so, especially if you're once you're at the interview phase and people ask like why our school or what do you like about our school? If you're talking to a researcher who's on behalf of the MD PhD program or your PhD program, definitely kind of keep that in mind. And I think when you're trying to look for that, this is a great place. Your own research mentors are great for when ask them who they know who are at X schools that you're applying to. Look if there's key pieces of literature, if there's just interesting work that's going on there. But I think that's kind of what the rabbit hole that as you kind of get through the application process, it can really be a never-ending process, but also the realization that most MD PhD programs, you're not committed into a single research topic the moment you walk in. No one's going to expect you to have that topic, but having ideas of people you might be interested in learning more about their work is always will get you brownie points, especially in the interview phase of the application process.
Thank you.
I know Haley and I have another meeting that we need to get off to. And so we're going to have to close the Zoom. Sanjeev and Philip, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to throw your email address, but I wouldn't expect you to throw your email address in the chat. In case any of the remaining students that are here have any additional questions and you want to make yourself available while I kind of wrap up. Well, you did it both, so that's easy. If any of the students who are remaining here would like to send additional questions off to our panelists, feel free to do so. But I am going to have to call it an evening just because I'm going to have to get off to another meeting here in about 3 minutes.
Yeah,
All right, thanks again,
this is
everybody.
Alex again.
Oh,
This is Alex again. I just threw my
yep.
email into the chat, and people are free to reach out for me. Just when you send your email, remind me where we met. All right.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.
Okay, thanks. Bye bye.